Welcome to worship in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. My colleague, Unitarian Universalist Minister Angela Herrera, has penned words so uncannily timely for this day. Today, her invitation is mine, is ours. Don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards, and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy, and your passion. Bring your loving and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your powers to heal. There is work to do, and all that we need to do it is here. So let us come in and then reach beyond the walls of this congregation. Let us fill this sanctuary with love and then harness its power to stop oppression. Let us join together in worship. And together, let us answer the call of love.
Worship is a way of seeing the world in the light of God. Abraham Joshua Heschel.
On a November day in 1840, Henry David Thoreau would write in his journal, "Over and above a person's business, there must be a level of undisturbed serenity." Undisturbed serenity. Earlier that same year, in February 1840, he'd write, "We must live on the stretch, not be satisfied with a tame and undisturbed round." Not be satisfied with a tame and undisturbed round. Which was the real Thoreau? Serenity or dissatisfaction with being undisturbed? That question in part informs today's service. Here then is one part of an answer. From an 1859 journal entry, Thoreau wrote, in his rage, regarding the fate of the radical armed insurrectionist and abolitionist John Brown. Writes Thoreau, when a government puts forth its strength on the side of injustice, what a merely brute or worse than brute force it is seen to be. A demoniacal force. It is more manifest than ever that tyranny rules. This is 1859, not this week. This is 1859, just so you know. High treason, which is resistance to tyranny, here below, has its origin in and is first committed by the power that makes and forever recreates humankind. When you have caught and hung all of these human rebels, you have accomplished nothing but your own guilt, for you have not struck at the fountainhead. It galls me, Thoreau writes, it galls me to listen to the remarks of craven-hearted neighbors who speak disparagingly of Brown because he resorted to violence, resisted the government, threw his life away. What way have they thrown their lives, pray? They preserve the so-called peace of their community by deeds of petty violence every day. Again, 1859. Look at the policeman's billy club and handcuffs. Look at the jail. Look at the gallows. Our second reading is by Jonathan Kwong.
They say faith without works is dead. So I worked for equality next to my queer friends who wanted to get married. And I worked for religious freedom next to my Muslim friends who were accused of being terrorists. And I worked for racial justice next to my Black friends whose lives were affected by police brutality. Yet, I didn't feel fully alive, even after working myself to death, until I let my work become a spiritual practice, until I let go of my attachment to the outcome, until I stopped chasing after political issues, one after another. I still believe faith without works is dead, but works without faith is just as lifeless.
Imagine for just a moment who might say of their work, it's deeply spiritual. Who might say that? It's deeply spiritual. Who would explain that their work is often led by opening prayer? Who would attest that in their work, people build altars? Any thoughts about who you think would offer such statements and what they might be talking about? Who might urge us to follow Goddess, God, Spirit, love, healing, transformation? Who might attribute their capacity to be deeply engaged to an intentional spiritual practice, and then describe their deep engagement as itself being spiritual? In 2013, George Zimmerman was acquitted on murder charges in the death of Trayvon Martin. 3 Black queer women, Patrice Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi, offered a response, and then a platform for other responses, and then a protest that morphed into a movement called Black Lives Matter. Through social media, they were able to tap into and then activate the rage felt among many young blacks and others, initially targeting their actions in on-the-street protests as responses to police-involved shootings. The source of the quotes with which I began, the person who said that their work is deeply spiritual, often led by opening prayer, where people build altars, was Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors. That spiritual, prayerful work is the engaged, activist, protest movement now known as Black Lives Matter. Things aren't always as they seem. Or put another way, what we look at and what we see, what we assume and what is actually the case may vary widely. Consider then the life, perspective, the engagement of one Henry David Thoreau. To the extent to which many of us know Thoreau at all, it is probably through having read his best-known book, Walden, more likely by assignment than by choice. Thoreau, the hermit, the loner, the wanderer in the woods who shunned human contact and removed himself as far as possible from the affairs of human society. It's more than a stereotype. There's plenty about who Thoreau was and about what he wrote that confirms that image. I am made to love the pond and the meadow as the wind is made to ripple the water, he'd write early on in what would turn out to be his voluminous journal. What business have I in the woods, he'd ask himself, if I am thinking of something out of the woods? It's the marriage of the soul with nature that makes the intellect fruitful, he'd profess, that gives birth to the imagination. And in his own explicitly spiritual testimony, Henry David Thoreau would attest, my profession is always to be on the alert to find God in nature. Though his actual sojourn in his cabin at the pond outside Concord was but a brief chapter in his life, to those woods and others he would retreat almost every day. There, in his quite intentional form of spiritual practice, Thoreau would come to understand himself most deeply in a transcendental relationship with nature. Though raised in the local Christian Unitarian church, as an adult he would thoroughly reject it, declaring of it in one of his many derisive statements, if it were not for death and funerals, I think the institution of the church would not stand longer. What he found within Concord's Unitarian church was deadly. What he found out in Concord's environs fed and filled his soul. And that, then, is Thoreau. Only it isn't. Such a depiction of Henry David Thoreau is, as my friend Galen Gingrich is fond of saying, 100% half right. Thoreau, in truth, was actually deeply concerned about the social order. He decried one form of social injustice, and another, regarded the government with unrelenting suspicion, spoke out against various forms of oppression, sought to use his voice and his influence to effect change. There's no clearer example to be had of this impulse than in Thoreau's regard for the radical abolitionist, John Brown. Brown earned his reputation as an armed combatant against slavery in Kansas. But it is his organization of the raid on the armory at Harper's Ferry that he'd secure his place in our nation's history. They are backed by funding from other abolitionists, including at least a couple of prominent Unitarian ministers. Brown tried to launch an armed, violent uprising intended ultimately to undermine the institution of slavery. Captured and tried, Brown's life ended on a gallows in a Virginia field with, among many others, Stonewall Jackson and John Wilkes Booth looking on. As you may know, Brown's legacy remains a source of historical debate. Some liken him to a terrorist, dismissing any potentially positive intended ends by decrying his violent means. Others are more accepting, even adulatory, regarding him, in the words of biographer David Reynolds, as the man who killed slavery, sparked the Civil War, and seeded civil rights. Such acclamation is surpassed significantly by Thoreau's acclaim. The walker in the woods took to the podium in Concord to declare before his fellow townspeople his spirited approbation. Brown was, he'd proclaim, a man of rare common sense and directness of speech, as of action, a transcendentalist above all, a man of ideas and principles. Chiding his disapproving neighbors, Thoreau would insist, though you may not approve of his methods or his principles, cease to call names, to cry, mad dog. The method is nothing. The spirit is all in all. It is the deed, the devotion, the soul of the person. So utterly abhorrent was slavery to Thoreau that all methods, including armed insurrection, were acceptable, understandable, even admirable, if they aided in the cause of abolition. It was his peculiar doctrine, Thoreau would say of Brown, that a person has a perfect right to interfere by force with the slaveholder in order to rescue the slave. And Thoreau would add, I agree with him. Listen to just how clearly Thoreau spelled it out. When a government puts forth its strength on the side of injustice, as ours to maintain slavery and kill the liberators of the slave, it reveals itself as a merely brutal force. Or worse, a demoniacal force. Elevating his estimation to something almost messianic, Henry David Thoreau would proclaim of John Brown, I would rather see a statue of Captain Brown in the Massachusetts State House yard than of any other person whom I know. Now, we must not be misled. Thoreau, Emerson, Theodore Parker, Bronson Alcott, others of their transcendental ilk, so despised slavery that even violence was acceptable in the name of abolition. However, we must not equate their position with any kind of meaningful attack on our nation's long history of white supremacy. Each of these men said horrific, abominable things about the race of enslaved Africans. There's absolutely no case to be made of them that they believed in racial equality. They did not. Their utterly white supremacist attitudes are a blight on our nation's history And to the extent to which we wish to claim any of them as our Unitarian forebears, a serious mar, exemplifying our own long investment in that worldview. That said, for today we can at the very least find fodder for reflection in Thoreau's full-throated embrace of Brown and his tactics. What means are acceptable? What means are excusable? What means might we use in the fight against injustice? What gets labeled as violent? And what violence gets excused in the name of keeping order or of protecting and serving? Whose lives matter? And just how much do they really matter? A man some think of as only a solitary hermit in the woods, gazing deeply into both a pond and his own soul, was also a fierce and unforgiving critic of the social order and of the status quo. From the meditative solace of woods walking spirituality comes a figure using his voice and influence to challenge the assumed order of things and in his own way to sound the call for transformation. I do not, he'd write, I do not complain of any tactics that are effective of good, whether one wields the quill or the sword. But I shall not think that one mistaken who quickest succeeds to liberate the slave. Things aren't always as they seem. Or put another way, what we look at and what we see, what we assume and what may actually be the case may vary widely. Patrisse Cullors, artist, activist, organizer, Fulbright scholar, freedom fighter, Black Lives Matter co-founder, has just published a book entitled When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir. In it, she writes, I'm beginning to see that more than a single truth can live at the same time and in the same person. I'm beginning to see that more than a single truth can live at the same time and in the same person. If that is true for an individual, for a spiritual practitioner turned street protester, for a silent saunterer turned vocal gadfly, how much more so for a group of people? What are we about? What is the meaning of this place? Here we are called, we are challenged, we are inspired to discover deeper spiritual meaning. We're invited to attend with attention to our own personal, inner, deep spiritual lives. But that's hardly our only truth. Here, too, we are called, challenged, inspired to become, in the words of our board's call to action, a more outwardly directed faith community, working with others who share a vision of a more just and equitable society. We're invited to attend with attention to the deepest truths about our nation's long investment in white supremacy, and to ask hard questions of ourselves collectively, of our larger community, of our social order. Here we are challenged, troubled, disturbed, discomfited to deepen our understanding of systemic injustice and inequity. We are those grounding ourselves spiritually and creating bold new possibilities of investing ourselves in the work of societal and environmental transformation. We're those who understand that spirituality shouldn't always take the form of personal meditation and quietude, our own kinds of walking in the woods. Sometimes like colors, like those Black Lives Matter activists, we must be those praying in the streets, building altars right in the very struggle against injustice. Where, my friends, is our Walden? Where will we find a place to renew our hurting souls? Where, my friends, is our Harper's Ferry? Where will we find the right partners under whose leadership we can join as co-conspirators in the deepest, most difficult work in the freedom movement? In ever more profound ways, some of us are coming to see that more than a single truth can, should, must live here among us. We, hearing the earth call, feeling that deep power, we, appealing to reason and compassion and conscience and vision, must work toward a transformed planet. We resist, we deny the false division between spirituality and social justice, understanding that while prayer can sustain action, prayer without action, spirituality without social justice, is but sounding brass and hopeless gain. Thoreau himself admitted, to give the within outwardness, that is not easy. But in these times, it is essential. We're being called to Walden, to walk the woods of spiritual sustenance and to care that those woods remain protected. But we're also being called to Harper's Ferry. To ask, for example, why environmental disregard and devastation so unfairly imperils the lives of those who are already marginalized by injustice and inequity. We are being called. Do you hear? Do you hear?
Good morning. That is so much fun to do, you guys. As a young woman, my rabbi would engage our Sunday school class in conversations about underlying questions in Judaism. Was a secular Jew still a Jew? Was support for Israel a political or a spiritual act? Could celebrating Christmas be done in a secular manner? He and I usually disagreed lovingly and with respect on each and every idea. Surprising. We agreed on the big one, though. Every lesson, every sermon from the Bima, and every Torah interpretation was intertwined with the message that our community had an obligation for tikkun olam, the healing of the world. We studied and revered leaders who had engaged, acted, and made a difference, from Maimonides to Rabbi Heschel. The lesson was clear. Ideals were arguable, but action was not. So I shouldered the obligation to be someone who acted in the world. I thought it would be simple to recognize what was right and then act on its behalf. Social justice work, as I saw it, was like laying a child's train track. First, you figure out where you're going, and then you simply put one piece down after another in the right direction. Your destination becomes both a guiding star and an inevitability. That's how it seemed when I read heroic stories of civil rights marchers and suffragettes and Holocaust heroes. But I no longer have the same understanding. I am still eager to lay the train track, but the destination is rarely in sight, and I'm no longer certain that I'm putting the next piece in an ideal or even a useful position. Change is mysterious and unpredictable. My reward for taking action is sometimes discovering that I have made a mistake, an enemy, or a new problem. So, the work doesn't feel like I thought it would. Rather than righteous and certain and proud, I often feel frustrated and ashamed, mistaken and confused. I need something to ground me, something that reminds me that the journey is long, the path is rocky, and we are all connected to something larger. That I am both insignificant and powerful beyond measure. Spirituality for me comes from deep contemplation of the nature of our world and human action. And so when I hear Jay remind us that the opposite of a profound truth is another profound truth, or when I read James Baldwin's warning that people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them, I see how I'm connected to others, even those with whom I disagree. I remember that Rabbi Goldstein warned us that not acting was also taking sides. And I find the forgiveness and the resolve to move forward toward an unknown end. I've learned that sometimes the necessary action is taking some time for that walk in the woods. Welcome to today's service. We're honored to have guests with us. Our members would like to greet you following the service. So that we might do so, if you're visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, please take note of guests seated near you, and after the service, invite them to join you for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance to the sanctuary. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place your completed card in an offering basket when they're passed later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. You'll find them along with the offering envelopes on the clipboards at the end of the row. You can begin passing those now. Some returning visitors may be interested in learning how to become a member. If so, talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome.
I add my own personal welcome to each of you. Thank you for sharing a portion of your Sunday here today, especially. In your order, you'll find other ways to be involved in the life of this congregation outside of this room. Next weekend is another rich opportunity here, our chili cook-off, a board-led service, a credo session. It's much more, many other ways to be involved here. You'll find those on our website in our congregation's electronic newsletter called Currents. I will be representing the congregation this week at a gathering of the senior ministers of our largest Unitarian Universalist congregations in Los Angeles. We hold with love and in our prayers, especially today, members of our congregation with deep need. Steve Bivens is hospitalized and awaiting surgery. Christine Fogarty awaits surgery this week, and we hold Christine and her family in our prayers. We remember today Kathy Spencer, who's hospitalized. Remembering also Joe and their whole family. As a community of faith, we join with people of compassion around the nation and the world today in remembering the community in Parkland, Florida. Today may mark some special occasion of joy, of celebration, of concern, of remembering for you, visitor, member alike. You're invited to come forward during the playing of the offertory to light a candle. We offer no music here as background. We attend to music with the same respect we offer to words. So I invite you, please hold the silence during that time, particularly mindful that serious things are being remembered here at these candles. So I've been asked by our stewardship team to remind you again today about our very serious need for your generosity. It's never a problem for me. I never hesitate to offer that message. I can look every single person in this room in the eye and say, we are worth more than you are giving us. You don't want a minister who doesn't believe that we are worth more than you are giving us. Throughout this year, members of this congregation are receiving a message that we need your pledge. We need to know what you will give every month. And now we are on the heels of trying to build a budget. What we are trying to do as a congregation is more ambitious than anything we have ever tried to do before. And we need your financial support. We're not there yet. We can't build a budget on what we have pledged right now. So I invite you to look at, revisit what you're pledging, how you might support us, how you might make what we're trying to do possible. Your goodwill, your presence, your volunteering are all appreciated, but we cannot do it without financial support. Please pledge as generously as you are able. I invite us to a time of meditation and aspiration. I invite you to let go of whatever it is that's in your hands, whatever it is that would distract you or someone else, and enter with me into a time of deep silence, the opportunity to breathe deeply together. Oh God, with people throughout our nation and around the world, we join today in prayer. In that mystical bond binding each to all, we join now in memorializing the latest lives lost to our collective social sickness. Lives who this time last week were young and vital, filled with purpose and promise. Rest in peace and in power. Aaron, 37. Elena, 14. Alex, 14. Alyssa, 14. Cara, 14. Chris, 49. Gina, 14. Helena, 17. Jamie, 14. Joaquin, 17. Luke, 15. Martin, 14. Meadow, 18. Nicholas, 17. Peter, 15. Scott, 35. May their memories long be a blessing. And may those now in deepest grief know of a nation's sympathy. Today, also, we name our frustration, our outrage, our exasperation, the sad, immoral, unjust reality rooted deeply in our long-standing social and political and economic order of things. In the power of our liberating faith, we say today, shame. Shame on those with political power on all sides of the political spectrum who refuse to lead who demonstrate a lack of integrity, honesty, basic human dignity, who counsel caution in the name of electability, who, deluded by partisan loyalty, misrepresent the past, excuse their own lack of courage, imagine the other side as the one wholly responsible, who put self-interest and political prestige so far above the common good. Shame. Shame on any of us whenever we put personal privilege and a claim to our rights above the common good. Shame. Shame on all of us for our collective failure to recognize, name clearly, and begin to dismantle a social order rooted in 4 centuries of supremacy that has regularly and with ready impunity undermined the common good. Shame. Shame on each of us if ever we mistake ranting with action, social media posting with showing up, scant support with generosity, derision with deep concern, self-interest with the common good. May prayers and rage, thoughts and outrage meet and meld. From deep wells of individual and communal spiritual sustenance, may justice at long last roll down like waters. And may the force of the good and the true and the beautiful rush over us like a mighty stream. So may it be.
This is a place that offers us so much, opportunities to march and learn and explore alongside a spiritual grounding that can nurture us when the work and the world overwhelms. It offers us a place to create community that supports and welcomes our unique contributions. What will you contribute? Please join me in an affirmation of our faith, rising in body and or spirit. The central task of
Let us go in the spirit of love.
Never knowing when or where we may find the divine.
Yet conscious of the spark within each of us.
Let us go in peace.
Let us go in love.
May our lives be a blessing.
Amen. Please be seated.